welcome everybody. TESL Dialogue Session. We're going to have a great evening today. So our topic is, as we mentioned earlier, oral corrective feedback, pedagogical implication. Our subject matter is Mohammed Falhasiri, and I'm going to move on to, give me a second, please. There we go. So I'm going to give some information about our subject expert matters. Mohammed Falhasiri holds a master's degree in TESL, and it is a teacher and teacher trainee. He is currently pursuing a PhD in applied linguistics at York University, where he works as a teaching and research assistant. He has published several articles and has presented at national and international ELT conferences. So before we start, for our new audiences, that whoever attending for the first time for our dialogue session, I'm going to give you a quick overview. How does it work? So as a host, I will be reading the questions. So the first question, introductory question, only one. And after that, subject expert matter will give some information, and then the floor will open to our attendees. As you may know, TESL Dialogue Session is pretty relaxed, and if you like, you can turn on your camera and your mic, and you can just join the discussion. If you like, you can put your comment in the chat, and Jen will kindly read out loud for us. And if you have any question or concern, you can also type it in the chat or raise your hand, then we can give you a chance that you can actually talk about it. And after that, we'll have 6 conversation questions. It will be the same thing again. I will read out loud, and Mohammed will take over, and then the attendees. And we'll have 1 breakout room activity that when we will come there, we'll explain how's that going to work. And if the time allows, we'll have 1 concluding question, and that will be it. So let's start with introductory question. So oral corrective feedback. We have 3 main types: recast, direct correction, and elicitation. So the questions I will let you to read, and we'll also explain which ones are students more likely to notice as correction, which ones are less obtrusive. And over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Manal. Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be learning from you and to be sharing. Yeah, oral corrective feedback could be provided in many different ways. These are the 3 main types. And I tried to provide examples to make them clear. Recast is, here's an example of a recast. A student makes a mistake, a lexical error, saying I gave a test instead of taking a test. And the teacher does not say that this is incorrect. Simply the teacher says, oh, you took a test? This is called a recast. That is, in response to a student's error, you simply provide the correction without indicating that what the student had produced was erroneous or incorrect. Recast could take different forms. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But research has shown that this is the most common type of error correction because it's the most natural one as well. This is what we do when our kids make mistakes as well. My son is 7 years old, and he constantly misuses much instead of many. He keeps saying, how much points did you get? How much? It's always how much. It's never how many. And I always use recast. It has failed miserably. But anyways, so for example, if she says, Daddy, guess how much points I got today? I like, so how many points did you get? This is recast. That is, you provide the correction without explaining that, hey, what you said is incorrect. You shouldn't say this. I hope it's clear what recast is. The second way that corrective feedback could be implemented is using direct correction. Unlike recast, that is very implicit and is done in a very subtle way, direct correction is very explicit. That is, you indicate to the speaker that something is incorrect. So you could say things like, oh, don't say I gave a test, you took a test. So the don't say part indicates that something is wrong. So to compare number one, number two, one more time, recast is what in the field of TESL we refer to as positive evidence. Positive evidence means you simply provide the listener with the correct form and you don't explain it. Negative evidence is number two. That is, you tell them what is not possible in a language. That is, you say, don't say this, which is not possible. Instead, say this. Recast, you only say this. There are a lot of theoretical arguments behind both of them, why one could be more beneficial than others, or than the other, I should say. Elicitation is when you're trying to encourage the students to self-correct. Maybe because you think they can do it. Maybe you think it's a kind of an error that is maybe more like a slip rather than something that they don't have knowledge for. So the same student says, I gave a test. Instead of correcting them, you ask questions like, you what? A test, hoping that they would say, I took a test. So you somehow give them a chance to self-correct. Now, these are the three main types of our corrective feedback. We're going to talk about the details later, but I was hoping you could also share what you think about these questions. That is, which one or ones do you think students are more likely to notice as correction? And the reason why I asked this question is that if you remember what I said about my son, most of the time he doesn't even notice the recast as correction, right? When he says, Daddy, guess how much points I got? And I'm like, so how many points did you get? He doesn't notice that I said how many. All he's interested now is to say how many points he got. He was like, I got 200 points. So my question is, which one or ones do you think the students are more likely to notice? Because if they don't notice it, there is very little chance that they will learn it. Because we're dealing with adult learners, and adults have been shown that they don't learn languages subconsciously like kids do. They have to put in effort. They have to think about what you say, reflect upon it. So that was the first question that I was hoping you could comment on. You could put in chat, you could share with us.
Yeah. There's some good answers in chat already. So Manal is saying that Manal prefers the third one, elicitation, over the first two. And another comment from Maria saying, in my experience, it depends on their culture and how they're programmed to learn. So does culture actually play into how receptive students are to feedback?
They're interesting points. Yeah, they're definitely evidence of learning. That's what I believe the majority of researchers believe, that adders, whether they're interlingual, intralingual, they are evidence of learning and development. That's what we always should say to students as well. Just trying to read in chat as well. Feel free to share by speaking as well if you want to. You don't have to write them in chat. At the end of the day, it's a TESL dialogue. So.
Yeah, and Giza is saying that number two is the correction that students will likely notice, but may not be the best. And I'm thinking that she's probably right. I mean, I've tried learning languages before, and I probably would get my attention if someone said, no, you said this wrong. Oh, okay. But I'm not sure how that would do as far as my, you know, it might erode my confidence a little to hear how badly I'm doing.
I think we all agree that number two is more obtrusive. Students are going to notice that something was wrong, and it could have negative emotional responses on behalf of the students as well. They might feel bad because you're correcting them while they're trying to communicate. Yes, true. Somebody said it's very cultural, and I agree. In certain cultures, students are kind of used to receiving intense correction from teachers, and they think if you provide more teachers, you're a good teacher. There's this researcher, his name is Lee. She's done a lot of research in Hong Kong. And this is the conception in that part of the world. If you are if you're not correcting my English, you're not a good teacher, period. So yeah, it's very cultural. And somebody said like number 2 is yeah, it's not the best. It's very controversial whether it is the best or not. Direct correction has been shown to be very effective. Recast, there has been a lot of studies on recast, mostly in Canada, interestingly. Roy Lister has done several studies, and yeah, students don't notice recast as correction. They think that you're just giving them a comment or you're building upon what they have just said. So if you take a look at an example, like if the student says, yeah, I gave a test, and just, oh, you took a test, most probably they're going to be focusing on the fact that you're just reacting to what they said rather than correcting them. How can we make recast more noticeable is a point of discussion as well, right? I haven't read what is in chat. I'm just hoping that Jen, you would provide us with a summary of all the comments made in the chat. And this very last question, that is, are you really aware of what you do? I have been part of different research groups, research teams that we recorded teachers' interaction with students to see what kind of feedback they provide, and then we interview them. Usually there is mismatch between what they think they're doing and what they're actually doing. For example, they might say, yeah, I tend not to provide direct correction because I think that it could damage their confidence. And then when you watch the recording, you see that they're doing it all the time. There is a mismatch, right? So do you think you're aware of what it is that you do? Do you correct? Maybe you have strong opinions against them. You think, oh no, correction is never helpful.
Yeah, I'm reading some of the chat comments here as well. And HR is saying direct correction may be made softer by changing the do not say, like less direct, indirect. And, you know, again, Canadians tend to be less direct. I mean, in real life, your teacher might be more direct, but, you know, Canadians generally tend to be less direct. And then Maria mentions, my students in Canada don't realize they're being corrected in Canada. They don't understand Canadian culture of polite correctness.
It's a very interesting point, Maria. I teach some courses at a college, occupation-specific language training, where you teach about culture. And this is what we also talk about, and that is sometimes employers say that some people don't understand that we're giving them feedback. That is, you tell them, yeah, this is a very interesting report that you've done. Maybe it's amazing, you've done a great job, and then they try to talk about some of the points that need to be changed, but they do it very subtly, right? Like they try to be very nice and they don't get it. So the other people think that, no, I did a really good job. So yeah, it's cultural too.
That's the hamburger method, Mohammed, where you start
the
off with the nice
one
stuff.
sometimes messes things up. Yeah.
Lionel Laroche actually has a great video on that when he talks about training in Canada, and he's actually from France, and he says that's not what he does, and he will do direct correction when he was giving feedback, and it didn't go over well in a Canadian context because the people he was giving the feedback to thought he was too rude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Francine says it's very intimidating. I mean, number 2. You know what? It's very easy to have a poll, right? These days, Zoom. Ask your students. You would be surprised how many students would say, I want you to correct me directly. Students, yeah, I mean, several research studies have shown that students prefer to be corrected directly because they see a lot of value in it.
Okay, that's great. We have great discussion already started from the first question. Do we have any other important comments or question before we move on to next question, Jen?
I'm just reading through this again, some great comments in here as well, especially talking about the role of culture. Maria followed up and said that she's been told they didn't realize they were doing anything wrong at work. And again, there's you know, trying to understand and decipher that, indirect indirect feedback is tough when when you're not in an educational setting. It's tough for students for sure. And then Sujata says direct correction followed by recast in the future may be effective too. So is there a way to combine some of these to just be a little bit more effective, perhaps?
But I think it would be better to do the other way around, right? To first provide recast and then direct feedback, because recast is more implicit and direct feedback is more explicit. It always makes sense to go from implicit to explicit.
Okay, are we ready to move on? All good?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Now we are gonna start conversation question. We have a total of 6. The first one is, now let's take a closer look at all oral corrective feedback types. The recast can take different forms. And we have isolated recast, integrated recast, empathic recast. So again, over to you, Mohammed. Take over.
Yeah, recast is very popular. That's why they talk about its different types. Take a look at that example that is provided here. A student makes a mistake using the past tense of the verb find and says, I founded my car yesterday instead of I found my car yesterday. Isolated recast is when you only correct the word that is incorrect. You don't repeat the whole sentence. So the student saying, I found my car yesterday would hear found. And that's it. This is isolated recast. It could be integrated, that is, you repeat the whole sentence and then you correct the one word that was not used correctly. And here's an example: you found your car yesterday. And this, you found your car yesterday, this could also have different intonations. You could have rising intonation. You could say, you found your car yesterday, hoping that the student says, yeah, I founded my car yesterday. And then you're like, oh, they don't know, because this is the second time that they're making a mistake. And that's when you say, no, you're not supposed to say founded. You found your car yesterday. Or the intonation could be falling. It would make it in a statement rather than a question. So you say, you found your car yesterday, which would be recast. That is mostly referred to as communicative recast. That is, the students would think that you're just talking to them. You're I don't know, reacting to what they said. So maybe if you change your intonation a little bit, that would make it clear for you if the student has made a mistake, it's a slip of the tongue, or if they don't have the knowledge for it. So think about the different types of intonation for integrated recast as well. And then it could also be emphatic, that is, you put stress on the erroneous word. So you say, so you found your car yesterday. I sometimes, when I'm doing a teacher training course, I say to teachers, novice ones, that even your facial expression could change. For example, you could frown and then that would send the signal. So you could say, like, you found your car yesterday. The frowning also helps the student to say, oh, something was wrong. I need to be alerted. So different ways. Again, think about it. Which one would be the least likely to be noticed? I think isolated recast might not be noticed. No, I think personally, anecdotally, isolated recast tends to be noticed better than integrated, because integrated, you put your correction in the sentence, right? Isolated, maybe they notice this because just one word that comes out of your mouth. Emphatic is also more likely, maybe. But I was hoping that you could also share that is which one is more likely to be perceived as correction by students. I was hoping that you could talk as well. Like everybody's putting their responses in chat. It's
yeah, it's okay to talk. There's some great ones. Lydigia, sorry, it's really tiny, says, my issue is always, how do you explain why founded is incorrect and found is incorrect? So sometimes we're not always walking in dictionaries of all things English language, even though we try to be. But sometimes you recognize there's the error, but you don't immediately have that answer as to why. And if the students are asking why, then that can be difficult to answer. And then Manal mentions writing the sentence on the board can highlight the mistake as well.
Yeah, but if you want to write it on a board, you have to ask the student to stop talking. So it's very obtrusive, right? You're changing I mean, somebody just mentioned there are different types of recast from Nina Spada. Nina Spada has done a lot of studies on focus on form, focus on meaning. And that is an important piece. That is, to what extent do we want to interrupt students? To what extent do we want to draw their attention to grammar or to language rather than communication? So writing it on the board, it depends. When do you want to do it? Do you want to do it on spot? That is when the student makes the mistake, or do you want to do it in a delayed format? That is after the student has already expressed their opinion. So yeah, putting it on the board, maybe in a delayed format can always work. But you know what? Sometimes the student says, oh, did I say that? They don't even notice that they made that mistake. It's very likely that they would react like that. Or sometimes you write it on the board and you ask the students to correct it. And the same student who made the mistake says, oh, the correct format. It all shows that this was more like a mistake rather than error. You know, the difference in mistake and error in TESL is that mistake, you make the mistake, but you know the knowledge, you have the knowledge. Error, you don't even know it. So
we have somebody raise hand, Jen, in the chat.
Yeah, of course. So Jata has your hand raised. Do you want to come on mic or camera and come on and contribute? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just talking about the isolated recast. I think I find that more effective in a way, but because I find that the student will often then repeat the sentence, integrating the correction. And so then they seem to be aware of the mistake that they've made, and they continue the sentence having now the correct way of speaking, you know, saying it grammatically correct.
Okay. Okay, and then we also, thanks for that, Sujata. I'm not sure if you want to address it, Mohammed, but then we also have Mike with his hand up for a point as well.
Okay, so is it my turn?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hi. So I was wondering, Mohammed, so it sounds like, you know, you're doing a study of recast for your PhD, is that right?
No, I'm working on written corrective feedback for my PhD.
Sorry, what are you doing a PhD on?
Written corrective feedback. This is oral corrective feedback.
Oh, okay,
but
written corrective feedback. Okay, right. Okay. Okay. So my question is, because I assume that, you know, you're probably very aware of like Nina Spada's, like, you know, empirical work, right?
I am aware of it, but to the extent of which could be open to interpretation,
Okay.
but yes.
Because my impression is that she's sort of like the queen bee of recast, right?
No, she's the queen of focus on form and focus on forms. We have the king of recast, and that is Roy Lister from a University of, I think, Montreal. He's like the king.
Okay, sorry, I've got my royalty all mixed up here. All right, so like I was wondering if you're aware then of, like, you know, like some of the research with respect to the relative effectiveness of implicit versus explicit recast. So I assume, based on what you've said so far, that you're kind of a fan more of explicit recast versus implicit recast. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, why is that?
Okay. It's a very interesting question that you raised, Mike. And all right, I mean, the answer to your question is going to take a while, but when we're dealing with adult learners, mostly. And adult learners have been shown to benefit more from explicit instruction because they're cognitively more developed than children. That is, they can consciously analyze things, unlike kids. And nowadays, the majority of applied linguists, like the most famous of whom are like Rudd Ellis and Robert DeKaiser, Michael Long. These folks all believe that adult learners first have to learn explicitly. That is, they learn the structure, and then through practice and communicative exercise, they develop the implicit knowledge. Back in the 80s, they believe that you want to learn English? Yes, just listen to me and try to speak to me in English. That's when they believed, watch a lot of English movies, you will learn English. And then, I don't know if you know Stephen Krashen, that's what he believed, right? And then Merrill Swain did many studies in Canada on French immersion programs. My son goes to those programs as well. How do they learn French? They speak English to each other, right? Because this is their first language in Canada, right? The teacher speaks French to them. And then 2 to 3 years later, they would speak very fluently. And they would have native speaker pronunciation. However, they would make a lot of grammar mistakes in French. And that is why Merrill Swain discussed that it's very important for learners in these programs to be corrected. Why? Because when you say something and then others provide you with negative evidence, you're more likely to take it in. But kids, recast, even if it is implicit, it's enough for them. Why? Because they still have that language acquisition device that Chomsky was talking about, right? They still have got let's just say they have a knack for picking up languages. We all agree that we lose our knacks for learning languages after certain ages, the critical period, right? So this is why the majority of the studies have found that explicit recast is more beneficial, because implicit recast is not even noticed. And following the noticing hypothesis of Michael Long, if something is not noticed, it won't be learned. So that is why, if you think of number 1, 2, and 3, obviously, if the students don't know that you're correcting them, what are the chances of they benefiting from the correction that you've provided? And then Mitra put, it depends on a lot of factors. This would be the takeaway. Like, this would be our conclusion. That is, we're going to talk about how these could somehow determine the kind of feedback that we provide. Mike, I hope that I answered your question. It was a very fundamental question that you had.
I have a follow-up question, Mohammed.
Sure.
Okay, this is a bit maybe philosophical, so I hope you don't mind.
Sure.
Do you think that there are perhaps like degrees of awareness with respect to so-called noticing?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? What
Well,
do you
for
mean by degree
example,
of awareness?
okay, like Finnish is my best second language because I was born in Finland, eh?
Right.
So but like I've studied a lot of linguistics, as you can probably tell. So like if I talk to my uncle in Finnish, okay, it doesn't take a lot of an implicit recast for me to notice that he's correcting me. So like I think that there may perhaps be, let's say, degrees of awareness where like, like I sometimes sort of like focusing, oh yeah, okay, so this is the case that I need to use in Finnish, blah, 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 blah. Whereas like, like in other cases, I just sort of like, like have some sort of like more peripheral awareness. So like in the same way that I've got peripheral awareness of like, like let's say where the mailbox is on a certain street without actually being able to tell you, Mohammed, yes, the mailbox is at 14th Avenue and 9th line. I've got like, some degree of peripheral awareness. Do you think that like, like some degree of peripheral awareness also exists with respect to recasts?
For sure. The answer is yes, of course it is, because somebody said it depends on age and a lot of other factors. The determining factor is the level of awareness that you were just talking about. How did I learn that language in the first place? If I learned it explicitly, that is, my teachers taught me grammar lessons, I am more aware of the structure. So if you provide me with even implicit feedback, I am more likely to notice it. Why? Because I am very conscious of grammar mistakes, or so it is a very important factor. In fact, there has been a lot of studies on that.
It's a great topic, but in the interest of time, I think we need to move on to the next question, if that's okay. But continue the conversation in chat for sure.
Okay, that's great. Okay, let's move on. We have great discussion going on. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. So second conversation question is direct corrective feedback. So what error type might be reminded more easily using direct correction? Again, we'll start with Mohammed and then we'll move on to attendees.
I mean, we don't really say that one specific type of corrective feedback is better than the other. That would be, I think, oversimplifying how complicated the topic is. We believe that it depends on the error type, right? What error type it is. Is it grammar error? Is it pronunciation? Now think about it. That is, if you're providing direct feedback, for what kinds of error would this be maybe more beneficial? If, for example, for pronunciation mistake, if I as a student say, I don't know, I'm thinking of mispronunciation. Instead of I think, if I say I sing, do you really need to say, don't say sing, say think? Or is it enough if you simply provide recasts and say, oh, so you think? I believe that maybe for this specific example, direct correction would be more effective, because if you simply repeat think, they're not going to notice the difference, right? But if you say, don't say this, say this, you're putting them next to each other. So the student is more like, so this is my question, that is, do you think direct feedback could be more effective for certain types of errors rather than others?
And there's an answer in the chat. I just want to say what Portia says here. It says it depends on the objective of the activity. If my aim is fluency, then as long as the message is clear, I do not interrupt. I do correct as soon as I get an opportunity. So there's that fluency accuracy issue going on there as well.
And which one at the expense of the other one, right? And you mentioned something very interesting, Portia, that is, it depends whether put the message across or not, right? I don't know. You need to think about whether this should be a determining factor or not. For example, most of these people, most of the students that we have, they intend to take some standardized tests like IELTS or TOEFL. I do IELTS examination. Let's just talk about IELTS for a bit. In IELTS, band 6, grammar is when they make grammar mistakes, but you still understand what they say. Band 7 is when they speak pretty accurately, but occasionally they make mistakes. So 6 is not really a good score. So you can't be admitted to university if your grammar is band 6, for example. So I'm just saying that in the real world, the demand is for the students not to make those mistakes as well. Director. Yeah, I think most of us agree that maybe for pronunciation mistakes, as Mitra said, direct correction would be more effective. For grammar, maybe I wouldn't use this. So if a student says, my sister go to work, I wouldn't say, don't say go to work, say goes to work. Because I think that this is a small mistake. They know the grammar rule, but it's just a slip. However, for lexical errors, I always use direct correction because students don't notice it. If my student says, just today, one of the IELTS, I was at work, one of the IELTS candidates said, in my country, if you speak loudly to the elderly, it's ugly. It's ugly. I mean, I was like, okay. So, I mean, I think they were intending to say something like it's inappropriate, right? Like it's rude. but maybe in their language, ugly is, so they were just literally translating. Now, if just imagine that I provide recast. So the student says it's ugly and I say, oh, it's rude. Most probably he would think that I'm saying the same thing. Was like, yeah. And then go on and not even notice that ugly was used incorrectly. But if I say, hey, don't say ugly, you mean it was rude, he would most probably notice it, right? And then he might ask me, why? What's wrong with ugly? Now we have it into, this is what Mike was talking about. This is focus on form rather than focus on meaning. We're stopping communication for a second. We're focusing on form, which means language. We discuss language, and then we move on talking about whatever it is. I don't know if you guys agree with me. That is maybe for lexical errors.
Yeah, saying, so yeah, those comments are coming up again. Yeah, errors of use and form for sure. And Maria says in Greek, ugly would translate to not nice. So yeah, direct translation errors for sure probably need some correction. I've had students the same thing, Mohammed, actually, when we were talking about accessibility and direct translation provided them use of words that were just not used anymore or considered to have very negative meaning, but they didn't know that, right? So very important that they notice that error for sure.
And Manal has got a very interesting point, and that is, why not prepare a lesson for explaining? It's okay. That is again Nina Spada's work, right? Whether what we teach should be planned and decided by us as teachers, or should it be the result of the students' needs? It's very contentious topic. It depends, right? Who should decide what grammar point we should teach and what should it be based on? It's very controversial. And most importantly, sometimes you design a task thinking, all the students have to use the grammar of must have gone, and then nobody uses it. You can never predict what is going to happen, right?
But I think as instructors, we can also record what kind of errors students are making in the classroom, and then we could prepare a class according to specifically focusing on one error or the common ones that is over and over and happening. Then we can turn into some sort of a class and explain it, as Nolan mentioned earlier. Will be very helpful, right. I think.
For sure. Yeah, and asking students what type of corrective feedback they prefer, maybe after we provide them with different type and say, which one do you like? Because if we haven't corrected them, they're asking them, they're not aware of that, right? They wouldn't be able to tell you, can you use Recast, right?
Hey, I think we have great discussion going on. It's very good, but we gotta move on if that's okay. And if we have anything important in the chat, please read out loud. And if we don't, we're gonna move on. The third question is clarification request. So can students self-correct? If yes, what error types can they self-correct? Again, we'll start with Mohammed and move on to audience.
I'm doing most of the talking, so I'm not going to provide a long answer for this one, hoping that you guys could also share what you think. Elicitation. This is elicitation. That is, for example, a student says, oh, it's a very common mistake. This photo remembers me, my mother. And then you know that this is not correct. You want them to correct themselves to say, this photo reminds me of my mother. And then you don't want to use Recast. So you say something like, so what do these photos do, to see, hoping that they would self-correct themselves, or say, can you say that again? This is clarification request. There are two different types of clarification requests. One is genuine, that is, you don't understand what they mean. The example of ugly, right? Just say something, you don't understand it. Like, so what do you mean by that? This is genuine. It could be pedagogical, that is, you know what they mean, but you want them to correct themselves, to come up with a better word. Now, think about it. What errors do you think students can self-correct, if they can?
Okay, we got a comment in here. JW is saying, in LINK, grammar is taught within a specific context to help the students to clearly understand the point being taught.
Can I just add something to what JW mentioned? And yeah, since 1980s, everywhere grammar is taught in context. It's not only LINK, right? And it is also very controversial. You know why? Because we teach grammar in a specific context. In that context, they get it. When they go to work, they don't use it. So this is also, there's a theory for that. That is also developed by a Canadian. It's called transfer appropriate hypothesis. That is, if you teach me a certain structure in a specific context, I might not be able to use it in other contexts. So it's not going to transfer. Why? Because when you taught me, for example, the grammar of should have, PP, like should have gone, should have done, and then you said, guys, when we're talking about regret, we say, I shouldn't have done that. Now, can you tell me about some of your regrets? You're drawing their attention to that specific form. Yes, they can use it in that context, but 3 days later, he drops this phone, breaks. Instead of saying, I shouldn't have dropped it, he says, I shouldn't dropped it. Maybe it wouldn't transfer. So, yeah.
Yes, and some other great points in the chat. Mitra is saying, raising your voice by stressing the part that you want the student to focus on, for sure.
For clarification requests, right? Like if the student says the photo remembers me, you say the photo what? That something like that to indicate that this word is not correct. So, but I mean, I was thinking you could tell me, can we really expect students to self-correct or not? If yes, for what kind of errors?
Not always.
Yeah. I mean, Irene says, I mean, yes, Dana Ferris has been doing studies and error corrective feedback forever. And this is what she says. She says, at the end of the day, we want to teach them to self-edit. Yes, that is the point. But also Lee found that students in China, this study involved over 2,000 participants. They don't like it when you ask them to self-correct. And their reaction is, if I could have corrected myself, I wouldn't have made the mistake in the first place. So they get angry when you ask them to correct themselves because they think it's your job to correct me. I don't know how to do it.
It's again, cultural thing, right? In Chinese culture, that's how they've been, because I used to teach there for 2 years and I know it's teachers' responsibility. That's what they think. So they should not find out their own mistake. You need to, as an instructor, show them what it is and how it needs to be done. And then they are clear.
Just in the interest of time, research studies have shown that certain errors can be self-corrected better than others. And these are the rule-governed ones. We have, generally speaking, we have two types of errors, rule-governed and non-rule governed. This is what Dana Ferris used. Rule governeds are the ones that follow rules, like the past simple tense, right? You ask students, like when you're talking about past, just add ed, inflection to the verb. It's I play, I played. It's rule governed, right? You could use it for many different verbs. The non-rule governed ones are like prepositions. Students hate them, don't they? Because there are no rules to follow. You say, I'm afraid of, but you say, I'm interested in. And they ask you why, you're like, oh, you can't ask me why. Rule governed ones, yeah, you can expect students to correct themselves, right? Like inflections. If a student says, my father go, maybe they can self-correct to goes. Lexical errors are very unlikely to be self-corrected. Yeah, if they knew, they would have used a different word. So most probably for lexical errors, you can't be expecting them to correct themselves because they would think this is the right word. Mm-hmm. Prepositions, right? They can't correct themselves because they're using their first language. They're translating the preposition they have in their first language in English, right? Into English.
Okay, can we move on? Is there anybody else?
Yeah, there's one more comment before we move on. I just wanted to read what Eva was saying.
Okay.
Regarding direct feedback, English is my second language. I've been in Canada for over 20 years, and I've heard people saying squirrel many times. But it was just very recently that my Canadian friend said to me that I say squirrel funny. I realized that for the last 20 years, I've been mispronouncing squirrel. Nobody told me. Thanks to my friend, I learned how to say squirrel correctly. I was embarrassed but grateful. Explicit, direct feedback is important, even if it makes a learner feel a bit uncomfortable.
Oh my God,
That's a
it's a
really good
very
point.
interesting point. Yeah. And then, and it speaks to what Mike just talked about. Is exposure to language enough? This shows that it's not enough. Meryl Swain is right. We need to notice the difference. She said for 20 years, people were pronouncing the correct word, and I was mispronouncing it despite having been exposed to the correct form. But I always thought that I'm saying it the same way up until somebody brought it to my attention. This is important. Bring it to my attention. Noticing hypothesis, Michael Long, as simple as that, right? And then that's when it happened, the correction.
Those are great points. I think noticing part is extremely important in language learning, but we gotta move on. Okay, conversation question 4. So metalinguistic. Theoretically, this type of correction should be the most effective because students most probably notice that their utterances is erroneously. What are the limitations of such correction? Again, we'll
theoretically, metalinguistic. This is an example. The student says, "I'm afraid from cats." Metalinguistic means you explain using meta language. You say, "Oh, the preposition is not correct. You're not using the preposition." So you start using words like preposition, present perfect, simple past. You know, all of a sudden you're using subject, verb. Metalinguistic feedback. Theoretically, it should be very effective. Why? Because the students will notice it, because you're talking about language. That's the meaning of metalinguistic. It must have certain limitations, right? We don't have a lot of time, but I was hoping that you could share what you think. I talk about the biggest shortcoming of metalinguistic feedback. Native and non-native speakers teaching English. One of them loves metalinguistic feedback. The other group doesn't like it very much, right? Non-native speakers who are teaching English, they love metalinguistic feedback because they're good at it, because they know the language explicitly. I'm one of them. I know the English grammar. I think I know all the details of it because this is how I learned it. I learned English at an older age. I started at the age of 16, and in non-English speaking countries. So I learned the grammar by studying grammar books. So I know the structures, so I could talk about language. Maybe non-native speakers, native speaker teachers, maybe they would not use these words. That's one of the limitations, because maybe they don't want to use metalinguistic feedback. And it also depends on the learners, right? If they've learned English explicitly, they understand it. Otherwise, they don't get it either.
Yeah, and there's a comment from Manel. The students can't relate to new words, and this will lead to students getting discouraged.
Okay. I'm moving on to following question. If there is no any other, seems like we don't have. Okay. Conversation question 5. Written feedback is respond to an oral error. In response to a learner's error, the teacher provides correction in the chat section of Zoom. What are the pros and cons of doing so?
Technology, right? We don't have to interrupt them anymore. That's what I do. If they make a grammar mistake or lexical error when they're speaking, I just write the correct format in the chat without saying anything, it pops up. So they know that there is a correction that I'm providing. It should have its own drawbacks and limitations and affordances, however. Jen and I were talking about how, because their student speaking is recorded now, you could provide feedback on their recording and they're not interrupted in class, right? It's done asynchronously. That is also what we could think about. What are its pros and cons? Cons, maybe students don't notice it again because they're speaking. They're not going to read the chat. I think in chat, it's always helpful if you use the technique of don't say, because they would be able to compare why that was not correct. Yeah, exactly. They don't notice it, what it is you put in chat. I totally agree with you. Yeah, we could move on, Guno.
Okay. So, last conversation question. Do you consider the following response by the teacher as correction?
This is very interesting for me, myself, and I was hoping that you could share. I don't know how much time we have for this slide, because the next one is
a breakout room. If time allows, we have concluding question. If it's not, just a breakout room. So a breakout room, we need about 10 to 15 minutes.
So how much time do we have for this slide?
This slide, I will say we have about 4 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Is this correction or not? A student says, I am very, very, very hungry. And this teacher says, oh, so you're starving. The reason why I provided this here is that you might think that this is not incorrect. Now, providing students with a better word that help them express their thoughts and ideas more precisely, should this be considered as error correction or not? Standardized tests like IELTS, they expect you to say starving instead of very, 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 very hungry if you want to get a higher band score. So in a way, it could be considered as an error because you're not conveying your ideas precisely. Take a look at the second example. They invited me to a party and I told them that I wouldn't go. Instead of saying I told them I wouldn't go, you could say I turned it down. To turn them down their invitation means they invited me and I decided not to go. Do you consider this as correction or not? And do you practice that?
Yeah, some action in the chat right now. They're saying yes. There's content correction, correct words and expression, and it's also vocabulary teaching, not just correction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First of all, try it. Your students would love you because they think this is the native way of saying things. You know what I mean? It's like when you give them idioms to use instead of certain words, they love it. Suggestions rather than corrections. Yeah.
That's a great idea for sure. Any other comments or questions before we move on?
Yeah, Maria is just saying here, her students in Italy always wanted help with this. In addition, when they have to write admissions letter, there's a word count, and this type of correction is really helpful for their language development. Okay,
I guess we're good. So now we have breakout room activity. I'm going to explain that a little bit. So Jen is preparing the room for everyone to join. So each room around 4 to 5 attendees, and we'll have this present. Please take your time and read this, and you'll be discussing. And you'll have about 10 to 15 minutes. So 10 minutes in the breakout room, 5 minutes to take up, and make sure when you are in the breakout room, know which room you are in. You are in room 1, room 2, and also make sure to choose a speaker or the reporter once we are back in the Zoom again, and that reporter will be talking on behalf of the group and telling us what happened inside the group, then we'll be.
Sorry to interrupt you. If you don't mind, please take a snapshot or use your phone to take a picture of this, because once you're in your breakout room, you need to refer to these, because the question says, the student says the book was very bored instead of boring. Now, this is what your student says. And I want you to provide all the different types of feedback for the same error. So how would isolated recast be for this? You discuss with your partners. Integrated recast for the same error. I hope it's clear what this activity is. So you're going to provide all the different types of corrective feedback that we discussed for one error to see how things would be different. And then you could talk about the benefits or the pros and cons of each. Because when you're in the breakout room, you're not able to see these anymore. So if you have a picture of this on your phone.
Actually, that's a great idea. Thank you, Mabit. If you take a screenshot of this, and you will have it handy in front of you. And as Mohammed mentioned, just one sentence, and how would you use those each correction to correct students' mistake? So if you don't have any concern or question, Jan will be sending you to your breakout room group. I guess, are we all good? Okay, whenever you're ready, Jen, please.
Okay, they should be ready.
Okay, so once you receive the invitation, please accept and go to your room. Remember which room you are in, and remember to choose a person who will be reporting once we are back in here. That's awesome. Welcome, welcome.
I think we're all back in the room now.
Great, okay. I can't really say, 31, okay. Okay, let's start with volunteers. Anybody would like to, we had total of 6 rooms. So anybody would like to volunteer? What happened in the group? We are very excited and wondering, what did you guys talk about? What kind of corrective feedback that you used? Maybe which one was your favorite? Any volunteers?
Oh, we got a hand up.
Okay.
So go ahead, Maria.
Hi, okay. So in our group, I don't know exactly if we did the right thing. So we just corrected with using the different examples, but we didn't really get into a discussion about like which one would be the best one or the reasons to use them. So I'm not really sure what the instructions were to do at the end other than the corrections.
No, the correction was the main one, but just in case if you didn't really get to it, and then you could, whatever you had would be fine.
Okay, so in our group then, the first one for the isolated recast, we just said boring, and that we could like change the intonation at the end, like boring, or like as a question. In the integrated recast, we did the same thing, but using the whole sentence. So the book was very boring. For the emphatic, we used the same word, but almost ending it with a question. So the book was very bored. And then for direct feedback, it was making a statement saying that it's incorrect, like not the book was very bored. The correct way to say that is the book was very boring. And then the clarification request, I don't think we got to that one. I think we skipped that one. And then metalinguistic, we just said to correct the grammar and then discuss like the semantics between the two different ways that the bored and boring would be. I think that was it. I don't remember if anyone else in my group remembers what we said about clarification request.
Yeah, please jump in if you would like to add. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing what happened in your group. We appreciate that.
No problem.
Anybody else in that group would like to? If not, we're gonna move to other room.
That was group 5. So thanks for that, Maria. It's always great to be volunteering instead of being voluntold. But let's get anybody else from the other groups just to see what else you might actually have. We got another hand up here. So I see Anne Cairns. So Anne, if you want to come on, Mike, and
Hi.
give us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. We went through them all, and we gave the answer for each. But then we talked about what we prefer, and one of our members made the comment that even with advanced learners, when she used the metalinguistic correction, saying the subject, like that you need a different subject, or they didn't know what the subject was. So it was interesting, even for advanced speakers, that we said it would be important that they know the terms. It's not fair really to correct if people aren't aware of what the terms are, the metalinguistic terms. So we said it might be useful to use that if we were really focusing, say, on prepositions, and then maybe you could use a hand signal or something to indicate that the preposition needed to be changed. Sorry, noisy background here.
He wants to participate.
Yeah, he's emphatic.
Yeah, no, correct your dog. No, not woof, 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 woof.
That's a good one, Jen.
That was sort of our main. Then we talked about what we like as learners, and yeah, that was about it.
That's great. Thank you so much. Anybody else in that group?
Yeah. Well, we also got some other hands raised.
Sure. Let's go with the one.
Manal.
Yes, so we had a discussion. We were group 6, and in the discussion we shared our experience as teachers and which way we prefer, which type of correction we prefer to use in our classroom. And we talked a little bit about the metalinguistic, and we all agreed that it's useful when you're teaching adults in the advanced level, or when you're preparing students for their IELTS exams, or professionally, when they are developed professionally. You can use the metalinguistic. Otherwise, when you're teaching adults with minimum exposure to English language, that would be difficult and rather challenging, because they don't know what actually every word or every term means.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mana. That was a great explanation. We appreciate it. Mike?
Yeah, I wanted to say that we were talking about how problematic metalinguistic feedback would be, because many of the students, depending on their level of awareness of English grammar, would be confused by the various terminology like present participle, past participle, yada, yada, yada. And then, so I had the thought that really, like, given how relatively nuanced the difference between bored and boring for many ESL learners is, none of them is really enough, because you need to have at least a mini lesson, because the problem is they don't get it. You can't just correct it, because like even then they're still stumped. They're like, well, why is that wrong? You know?
That's a good point, Mike. Thank you. Anybody else in that group would like to add, or any other groups?
We've got another hand up with Brenda.
Great.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah, we got the same answers as the first group. The clarification one was, I believe, getting the students to try to correct themselves. The group mostly found that we all provide feedback, but not the direct feedback was important, but I think the way it was written on one of the slides, it sounded a bit rude, like you said, what? So we all thought that, yes, we do provide feedback, but we would do it in a direct but a gentler way. But it was interesting. One of the teachers in our group, as a second, who speaks English learned English as a second language, said that she really likes that really direct feedback, and it helped her learn much better. And she also mentioned that if I'm, as a native Canadian, speaker, she says we're a little bit too nice. I thought that was interesting, that we could be more forthright in our feedback. And she said that some of the teachers she's had who are non-native English speakers are much more forthright in their feedback. So I thought that was an interesting comment, and I appreciated that feedback anyway.
If I may just say something, because this is a very important point that you mentioned, Brenda, that is to be more gentle, and we need to remember that for most learners, we're not saying things about their personality. We're not targeting them. We're targeting a part of a language skill they're learning. They understand it and they really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I understand your concern. I know where you're coming from, and that is, yes, if I'm speaking English is my first language, and you try to correct me and say, don't say this and say that, that will be very offensive. That's when you try to strike a balance between making corrections and saving the person's face. On the other hand, think about it. If you're learning French, it's a skill that you're trying to develop, and you see this as an opportunity for learning. So a lot of studies have shown that students do perceive this as an opportunity to learn rather than the teacher attacking them.
Right.
And then something about what Mike said, and that is saliency of error, right? Like how subtle an error is. Yes, it's very important that sometimes we, after providing feedback, we decide to have a mini lesson on that structure because we know that this is not enough.
Yeah.
And many of you have touched upon the limitations of metalinguistic feedback. I mean, we had a whole slide on that. I was hoping that, yes, as you could see, there is a lot of limitations, right? Sometimes the students don't understand it. Sometimes the teachers don't have the knowledge, then metalinguistic knowledge. I mean, like what Mike was talking about, present, participle, past. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. That was great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing what happened in the group. Any other group that didn't get a chance?
Oh, and I need to say one more thing, and that is emphatic recast. The example that one of the participants, that was not emphatic. If you say the book was very bored, if you recast means you have to correct it, not say the incorrect form louder or with a different, you must correct. If you don't correct it, it's not recast. So emphatic would be, you say the book was very boring. And clarification, you say something, the book was what? Or what was the book like? You try to poke them to say that again.
I agree. This is exactly what we talked about, actually. Keep eliciting more language from the students so they can explain. One other thing too, I would even take out very. The book was boring. We don't even need very. That is irrelevant there. So especially depending on the level that you are teaching, very, in this case, it was just boring. So give them examples, model the language you want the students to be able to produce. So so whatever was said.
And Porcia, do you remember slide number 5 or 6 when I said to provide a more exact, like maybe if my student says this, I would say, don't use boring, use the word dry. Like if you say the book was dry, it would exactly, and then they would really appreciate it because they were like, oh my God, this is the kind of word that I've been looking for.
Exactly. And I keep like you said, eliciting, probing the students, what was boring in that book? Why didn't you like that book? Why was it boring? So you keep the conversation going, and in this way they produce so much language. It's amazing. But there are many ways of doing it. But that's one.
And one more thing that I want to say is the aim of this session was not to decide which one of these is more effective than
Right.
others. They're all good, because what you just mentioned, if the student is talking about last weekend and then talks about a book that he read, but he's talking about last week, and this is just a portion of what it is talking about, maybe we don't want to provide that long correction because he's talking about something else. Somebody mentioned in chat, it depends on the aim of the activity, right? So it all depends on, then I don't know if we have time for the next activity, do we?
No,
Okay.
Unfortunately, but I just want to ask one more time, did we miss any group, or any group didn't get a chance to report what happened in their breakout room before we move on? Because we can have a few more minutes for that. No? Okay, so unfortunately, we had a great discussion session, therefore we cannot continue with the concluding question.
You could just think about it. Just think about it.
Yeah,
how
you
would
can
you
think,
correct these?
Exactly. So you can think about it, and I will be sharing Mohammed's contact information. You can write him in that case. So this is his contact info. If you happen to have any question or concern about what happened today, anything that confusing, anything that needs more clarification, feel free to email him or contact him with LinkedIn. He'll be more than happy to help you out. And again, thank you so much, Mohammed, for joining us this evening. That was a great session. We truly enjoyed it, and we learned a lot about oral corrective feedback. That was wonderful. And we have our closing slide. Jen's going to go over for the next sessions.
Yes, and I just echo the sentiment. So much conversation going on here. I don't want to end it, but we have to end it at some point. So just to close up, I do want to say thank you so much to everybody for participating. It's been awesome. Your PD certificates will be emailed to you using the email address with which you used to register for the event. This could take up to 7 days. You'll also get a survey. Please fill out the survey. We really actually do read them. And this is how we improve ourselves and get better. And yes, please do it. And so answer the surveys and we will get that back to you, that feedback that we need. Coming up on Tuesday, May 10th, 2022, music in the ESL classroom by seasoned veteran Rachel Forney. She's done many webinars for us before. We're excited to have her back in here to talk about this topic here. So register for it and let us know what you think. What else is coming up? Well, on Wednesday, April 20th from 7 to 8, you think it's ungrammatical, but it just ain't so. Brett Reynolds has got a really great take on this topic as well. And on Saturday, April 24th, between 3 and 4, note the different time, differentiated instruction, myth and reality. So if any of these topics are interesting to you, please sign up. And we would just like to extend our very hearty thank you and appreciation to all of our members and our panelists and our presenter, Mohammed. Thank you so much. I learned so much. I mean, I learned so much I couldn't even tweet.
That is so true, Jen. Good point. We learned a lot today. That's awesome. Thank you so much again, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you next time. We'll definitely see you next time. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.